Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Reedman. I'm the creator of the K-12 School Shooting Database. This Tuesday, November 18th, there's a new documentary that's coming out on HBO. And the first thing I want to say is this interview is not sponsored in any way by HBO. This is my area of research, and I reached out to the producers, said, let's set up an interview and talk about it. So this documentary is called Thoughts and Prayers, and it's tracing the $3 billion active shooter preparedness industry and its effects on students and educators, which is exactly what we do on a lot of episodes of this podcast. So I'm really excited today. The two guests are the directors of this film. Zachary Katapari is the award-winning director of Fire in Paradise. That is a documentary that came out a couple years ago about the very destructive wildfires that completely destroyed a town in California. The other director is Jessica Dimmick, who her award-winning film is Flint Town, about the water crisis and kind of broader crisis in Flint, Michigan. So Zach and Jessica, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I saw your film last night, Thoughts and Prayers, and I don't quite know what to do with it. So we're going to unpack some of those ideas today. But to get to that point, you know, you made films about some very depressing parts of America, towns that have been forgotten, towns that have been destroyed. What led you to go from those movies into deciding to do something in the school shooting space?
Well, I think we started thinking about this topic. It's always kind of top of mind because we're Americans, and I would be hard pressed to think of Americans that don't just think about gun violence. And then as it pertains to lockdown drills in schools, Zach and I have a kid. She's now 8. And, you know, after we got away from like the couple of years of just like her being blissfully at home and not having to think about that, when it was time for her to go to school, we had to confront what basically most American parents have to confront, which is that our little thing was going to start doing lockdown drills. And so we started talking about that and thinking about that and wanted to explore that. And originally the idea was that we were going to explore that in photographs. And we thought that if you could like bring people into what it looks like inside of a classroom while all these little children are like huddled in a corner with their teacher kind of standing guard at the doorway, that would be like a really disturbing thing to look at. And so originally that was the idea. And then it really, first of all, as we like did research, the like vastness of this industry kind of opened itself to us. So that was one thing, but also that like, even in just the drill, I think what's so haunting about it is the idea that like the class is happening right before and they pause to do this thing and then they just go back to a normal day. And so like you can only really achieve that in motion. And so that's when we decided to make a film.
Now, when you say kind of achieve that in motion, one of the things that I noticed about this film is how disjointed it is and how many juxtapositions it draws between, say, kids in school and then flashing right into, say, a hyper-realistic video game simulation, and how jarring a lot of those cuts are. And what creates a lot of those different perspectives is you interview maybe 60 or so people for this. What was the process to figure out who you wanted to talk to and then start to put this kind of production together?
Good question. It took obviously a while to, you know, kind of flesh out all the various tentacles of what the industry and the trainings and kind of the cultural effect actually looked and felt like. We kind of learned by doing a lot of going to training programs. Jess and I are both photographers, so we would go to sort of programs or to like meet with people just to get a sense of what might work visually for a film. I mean, I think that we knew that we were super interested in the way that like capitalism had filled in a void that gun reform had left, or sorry, gun violence had left. And so, so we really went out and tried to see kind of like what the space had, but it didn't take long before we saw that like there was just really unique things happening. And so we started to kind of film as much as we could. So we started with the program in Omaha, Nebraska, where the guy Thrasher, he's got the shock knife and he's chasing the kids around. And, that was our initial entry point. And we just were fascinated by the idea that like, instead of us changing what felt like maybe policy and replacing that with preparedness, just was the plan. And that really sort of like, we just wanted to see how that worked in all these various different ways. So, it started with like kind of programs and training, and then we went into products, and then it took a while for us to sort of discover the right sort of school to track, because we wanted to see what a lot of what the film is just trying to hear and be inside of the rooms when these conversations are happening. Like, what are people thinking and talking about as they're trying to plan for these exercises? Like, what experiences are they bringing to the table?
And
So,
also
yeah.
like, what are they not talking about? Like
What are they
what's
not talking
being
about?
discussed and what is being omitted.
Yeah. Yes, totally. So, to answer your question, there's definitely a few products and a few trainings that we went to that are not in the film, because they became redundant. I mean, I think one of the things we really had to do is not make it feel like everything is the same. Everywhere we go, we're trying to add another layer of complication, or add another layer of character, or add another layer of technology or product or whatever. And so, there's a process of elimination, but yeah, that's how we sort of ended up with kind of all of those different pieces. And hopefully, I think the idea is that they're kind of, we're trying to create, I mean, Jess says this all the time. It's like, it's an architecture of meaning, right? It's like, it's not one thing is the problem or one product is the problem. It's like that all of these things are happening at the same time. And that means something bigger than what one individual is saying or doing, or what one individual program is doing.
Now, in the multi-year effort to put this together, I think it is interesting how whoever your first interview is can set the tone. Because speaking to that active shooter training center that's in Nebraska, it looked like the layout of a school. The guy talks about how he trains military and police and kids. And that's kind of in the middle of the film. And it's one of the most haunting scenes. I actually took a specific note on it, because you film in slow motion, kind of from a low angle, this guy who's running after kids, and then it cuts right to his interview, and he says it's kind of fun. The kids actually enjoy it. And that seemed so divorced from the reality of there is a large body of peer-reviewed evidence that hyper-realistic drills are psychologically damaging for everybody who's involved with them. And the fact that this guy running this training center was just so divorced from reality, I think really kind of set the tone for maybe where some of this went. I want to ask you so you start. It's just a cold open. There's no narrator throughout this. Most of the people are never really introduced. Some have first names, but a lot of the people who speak, you don't know who they actually are. And you start with just a still camera with a wide angle recording different vendors giving their elevator pitch. Out of all the footage you had, why was that your starting point?
Well, we experimented with a lot of things. It was actually like a really tricky thing, and that was not always our starting point. I think some of that stuff, we always kind of refer to it as like the Shark Tank scene. It's like everyone's got these products and they're going to give you the quick version and demo of the product. And one of the things is that it's one of the more humorous sections of the film. And it seemed important to like train our audience right away that it was going to be okay to laugh at moments, because the world that we're going to bring you into, we think it's absurd and we're presenting it in an absurdist manner. And so it like felt important to right away train the audience and to also like let them know, because this is such a charged topic and no one wants to watch a film, or they don't think they do, about gun violence. And so it felt important to let the audience know this is going to kind of be a different take. You're never going to see a victim. You're never going to see any kids get hurt. You're never going to see it, whether or not there's some trauma and some psychological scars from this type of training, absolutely. But in terms of like actual gun violence, you're not going to see a victim. You're not going to see people get hurt. And so it's like our first kind of wink to the audience of like, all right, come inside and we're going to show you this different angle. And we often talk about this approach as like a Trojan horse, that if we were to start off with this more intense stuff, kids running down hallways screaming, that it's too much. We all live with this, and it's so hard to confront. We feel so powerless that we kind of want to look away. And so that was very much part of that decision.
In those product pitches, just one question on that, Zach.
Yeah.
So there's a woman who's presenting a robot dog, and she says the dog can be equipped with lasers to blind people and flashbangs to set off. And as she's saying this, the dog falls off of the table. First, what were the chances that could possibly happen? And then how did you two keep it together in that moment? Because these people were so serious in their presentation.
I think one part of this whole thing is that it's important to understand is that while there is humor and there are some characters that are slightly over the top, we are not trying to catch the vendors, the manufacturers, the training people. Like they are doing, and like you said, like David, they're being serious. They're seriously trying to like offer solutions to this problem. Now, some of those solutions are capitalistic in their sort of creation, but for the most part, they have good intentions, right? And so, a lot of what we wanted to do was let people and images speak for themselves. That's a little bit why things are like, in that opening scene, we are just like, we are flat against, the shot is framed flat against a wall. Let everybody come in, do their pitch, and not editorialize the moment. Like, I think we edit and there's music and all this stuff, but we don't want to like we want them to create their own tone and their own feel to what they're trying to pitch. And so, the fact that the robot dog falls off the table is just a byproduct of that process. It's a lot of what happens in these scenarios is hard for us because we do have, strong feelings about gun control. We didn't want the film to speak for those feelings totally. I mean, I'm sure there's some sense that the filmmakers have a feeling, but like, I think really we're trying to present this stuff as is. And so, yes, there is some challenges in when we're talking to people, and we did ask pretty much everybody what their feeling is about guns and how it plays into all of this stuff. And, people were giving us answers that are, for the most part, people wouldn't actually bring it up unless we brought it up. But when they would answer, the answer was unsatisfying, right? It's not that they were wrong or that their position was, particularly controversial. It's just that it's just an unsatisfying answer. And I think that a lot of what we had to do is kind of like hold our own feelings in, including in moments where it's funny, but also including in moments where it's philosophically opposed, and try to just be as like conversational and like present. This is all the thing we all say is like, we just need to be able to talk to each other. And I think that's a lot of what we were doing in those situations without being harsh or judgmental or combative.
Well, the decision not to have a narrator, I think, really forces you as the viewer to watch this more carefully because you don't know where anything's starting. If it had opened with 20 product vendors were here with us at this ballroom in California, then it would frame something. But what I think what's so shocking in a lot of it that you watch is you don't know what to expect. And when you don't know what to expect from any of these interactions, you have to really read the people and their cues. And I think that was something that stood out to me is in one scene you have two siblings and they're together in the bedroom, and the younger sister reveals that she keeps an emergency kit in her backpack. And she won't say what's in it, but it sounds like she's got tourniquets or bandages. And she's, the middle school sister, and the high school brother then just starts crying because he's realizing that, probably this world that he's trying to, shield his younger sibling from, that she's actually even more involved in it than he is. And then that's so different from some of the vendors that you portray, where their comments end in a smirk, their comments end in a smile, their comments end in, this is great for business. We're going to be a $300 million business by the time that this takes. And it shows this detachment between the adults who've created an industry from the kids who actually live in this industry, where even talking about it, even realizing that your little sister carries around a first aid kit is just emotionally devastating for them.
Yeah. I mean, the adults that are those vendors, as the adults that are on this call, like none of us, David, I don't know exactly how old you are, but I'm going to assume you didn't grow up doing drills. I'm going to assume you didn't grow up being told that, like, during, second grade math class, Johnny might come in with a gun and shoot you. So you had to learn where to hide, what to do with your body, when to fight back, all of those things. And so the detachment that you're picking up on is real, which is that, like, I'm probably detached from that reality as well. But when you actually give the microphone over, so to speak, to kids that are like living in this reality every day, they are scared. They live with this all the time. They think about it all the time. They're pretty numb to it. Like, just because they're scared doesn't mean they're quaking in their boots all the time. I mean, we film a lot of drills where, like, kids are just kind of sitting there on TikTok, but that is also disturbing. I mean, it just, like, speaks to how commonplace this is. Like, how many times do you need to do a drill for a mass shooting before you start just, like, goofing off with your friends and doing TikTok? It just shows that, like, they're doing it all the time. And so that detachment is, like, is born from that.
And I think I
think what we're
affiliated.
trying to do in the film is, like, give the microphone and the attention back to the people that are living through this. And because we've lost the plot, right? Like, we have completely lost the plot. Clearly, this is an insane way to live. And so we're just trying to shift back the focus to be like, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I identify with the kids because I was in high school in the Washington, D.C. area during the serial sniper attacks. So that was something where random people were being gunned down
Right.
within miles of our neighborhood. And a middle school kid was shot and critically injured just getting out of his mother's car to walk into the school. And we ran in zigzag patterns from the bus into the school, and there was newspaper over the windows. And I mean, that was a reality for thousands of us in the early 2000s. But I think if somebody had swooped in with a product at that point, we would have seen right through the motives of that adult. I think the other thing that was so shocking, that's so divorced from reality, is you added multiple moments about this in the preparation for the drill and then showing the drill themselves, is these instructors keep telling people to scream. You need to scream as loud as you can. You need to scream, I want this. I've treated quite a few gunshot victims and stabbing victims. People are extremely calm. On the scene of mass shootings, people are eerily silent. And these folks are creating theater. It's not, and I think you represented that because you show how the kids' perception of it is so different from the people who are the supposed experts.
Well, I mean, it also, and sorry, Zach, I'm dominating. I'll
Go ahead.
in a second. But like, the idea of theater too is, like, all of these things are so theoretical. Like, we can all have a plan for what we're going to do, but when someone walks in, even to the most well rehearsed preparation, like someone walks in with an AR-15, the plan is out the window. None of us have no idea how we're going to react. None of us are going to do the thing that we practiced for. And if what we practice for shifts by anything, it happens during a lunch instead of a class, if it happens during changeover from class instead of during the actual, like all of this is out the window. And so that's the other part, which is just like, there's no planning for this. This is not, we always say that everything in the film is practice, not prevention. That everything we're seeing is just like practicing over and over. What are you going to do when it happens? What are you going to do when it happens? Well, like, let's stop practicing for what we're going to do and start working on actually preventing this from happening.
A stylistic question for you, because you had so much footage from this and it had to be condensed down into 90 minutes, and kind of the climax of the film is finally this school district in Washington. They've been rehearsing for an active shooter drill. Some of the students are going to be involved with it. You've heard the superintendent and some other folks talk about it. You had this amazing shot where the director of security for the school has these little models, and he's explaining, everything that's going to happen, like it's, a military battle plan that's about to go down. And then as you show what's actually happening, it cuts back and forth between the actual drill, some shots of kind of empty hallways, and then this video game, which you portray where their teachers can practice a video game where a school shooting happens. And it's these seamless cuts in between kind of those three different areas. How did you decide that you were gonna finally show like the big drill in this manner?
It was hard because we, you said this thing at the very beginning with all these sort of disjointed stories, and there are, while there is like a fair amount of like going from one place and then leaving it, there are stories that continue throughout the film, and we're following some kids throughout the film, and that journey, and one group of teachers that is going through a program as well. And that journey we wanted to conclude together, right? Like we wanted to find out how transformative it would be to be Rachel, the school teacher in Utah, or Quinn and Cannon, the kids in Long Island, or Summer, the teenager in Medford, Oregon. And so it was the editor, we had two great editors on this film, Carter Gunn and Miles Kane, and they worked through a bunch of different iterations trying to make the ending feel like it was not just climactic and crazy, but that it actually was serving a purpose of the film, which was essentially to bring all of this stuff together into some sort of like, collective meaning. And so while the video game stuff, a lot of what we were trying to do with this film also is sort of remind the audience that we are doing these drills, all of these simulations, all the practice is because we know what to do because it's happened so many times. And so, the video game, for example, is a thing in which they practice all sorts of different scenarios, and it's teachers sitting around a table with headphones on, communicating to each other, running down the hallways, trying to figure out how to react in the event of a random violent act. And they are using real life examples for that. And the I think you pointed out something interesting, which is that the baseball field with the kids lying all over it at the end, that mass casualty exercise is not something that's really happened with screaming kids and anything like that. So I think what's so crazy is that we have all these real life experiences, but we're also just adding our own imagination to them, and all those things are kind of coming together at the same time. I think it really sits like it's the strongest moment and the strongest idea I have in this whole film about how far we've gone is that there's a fake press conference after the mass casualty exercise.
That
and in
says
that fake
press conference in
says
giant
fake
letters.
press conference on the podium, just so that it's very clear to everybody. And those there were multiple meetings with local news reporters and experts that helped the school district and the police department practice and prepare for this fake press conference. So, and there's been so many shootings that they have so many reference points of what's worked, what hasn't worked, what to say when, what not to say at the beginning. And, I think that what's so amazing about the fake press conference is that it's dialed. They know what to do. Like they have the words ready. Like if you're a superintendent in a school district, you have probably thought of in some sense, like what that moment would be like for you. And so, I think that stuff all kind of coming together was meant to sort of like show you the full picture, the full spectrum of how all of these, these things are happening and what, how they're different and how they're the same, and what they're referencing.
So for our last couple minutes, as soon as I was done watching this yesterday, I just took a really quick note on my phone with just what's my immediate reaction. And I described it as a postmodern 90-minute examination of the insanity of modern America, the worst parts of fear and gore culture combined with capitalism. The calls for thoughts and prayers are as empty as the industry this film brutally portrays. Is that the message that you want the audience to be left with, or what do you want somebody to take away from this?
Yeah, I think it's really close. And I have to thank you overall for just being such a um careful audience member and such an observant audience member. Like some of the things that we work so hard to do and we're so sure are just gonna be so over people's heads, you've really caught. I'd say that the one, I think that while that the industry, as you describe it, can be viewed as empty, I think what we're always trying to do is that while we are critical of this industry, because of course there is some opportunistic behavior here, and God forbid we ever take an item off the shelves, we just add more items, that the industry, that the final takeaway, we don't want to be that the industry is the problem. The guns are the problem. The gun violence is the problem. This industry is never going to solve it. And that's the kind of emptiness that I think you're alluding to. What we really want people to remember, that guns are the number one cause of death amongst children in the United States, and that this is a uniquely American problem. And of course, if we do look at the lowest common denominator of why it's an American problem and doesn't happen in other places, it's because of the prevalence of guns. And so we just want to make sure that people are left understanding that this industry is not going to be the solution, but that the guns are really the problem, if that makes sense.
And just to add to that too, I think, what the film is offering is just a new way to talk about this, right? And a new way to look at this. And I think that where we are right now in 2025 is gun reform feels very hard, meaningful gun reform feels very far away. And politics does not seem to be that interested in making these changes. And I think that part of that is because we are all cumulatively exhausted by the conversation and by the same things happening over and over again and not making any sort of difference. And so I think in a lot of ways, the film is trying to remind and change that conversation a little bit so that it feels like we can talk about it in a new way. And what it's also trying to do is sort of show that it's not just because mass shootings are pretty rare. School shootings are very rare. And we understand that. But I think the fact that guns are so prevalent, there are so many guns, there are I think 2023 with a record number of guns were confiscated in schools. I think most of the kids we talked to, not all of them, but most of the kids we talked to had a student make a threat or a student bring a gun to there was always these kind of because in the film there's a story about a custodian who plans a mass shooting. And I think that while the reality is that the risk is the event is rare, the risk is real. And that part of it, needs to be part of everybody's conversation. And so I think the film is trying to, give people a new way to remind people of that and give people a new way to talk about it.
Yeah, when I've studied hundreds of school shootings back to the 1960s, you could pull the year out and switch the details, and they're all essentially the same.
Yeah.
You can listen to any press conference after a school shooting and change the name, and it's basically the same thing. And you can look at the political statements, and they're basically the same. So I think,
David, where have you been? We should have interviewed you for this film. You know probably as much as anybody collectively that we spoke to, because I think it's also so it happens all over the country. There's like, there's academics that are following all this stuff, but it is really like, it's a thing that no journalist covers over and over again because it's so demanding. It's like just a hard thing for people to stick with because it's so harsh.
it is, and watching it, I've worked for at least 1 hour on school shooting data collection for every day, including holidays and weekends, since February 15th, 2018, the day after Parkland. And when I was choked up listening to the kids in their bedroom talking about first how scared they were to do the drill, but then the need to carry a tourniquet, because I keep a tourniquet in my backpack because that's now how I'm wired to think about the world. And I think that when so much of this is the same, when we have the same victim profiles after every shooting, presenting something in a way that makes the audience doesn't give the audience a message. Instead, it makes the audience find their message. And this is an incredibly powerful way to present this information.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. That's very nice, and we really appreciate the work that you are doing that every single day since February 15th, 2018, because I think it's so much broader and bigger than I think even people sort of really understand.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately the numbers have gone down in the last 2 years. Things got pretty crazy right after COVID. There was a shooting at a school somewhere in the country every day of the year in those 2 years after COVID. And most were ones that you never hear about. And there's never a GoFundMe, but there's a kid who's dead or somebody with life-changing injuries and hundreds of other kids that witnessed it. And that's been the reality for so many kids across the country. So I know you've got a tight schedule with this premiere coming out. The movie is Thoughts and Prayers. This is a totally organic conversation. There were no sponsors or interests. This is me caring about a topic that you all put a tremendous amount of time into. So I want to thank you for that. There's a link in the show notes, and I hope everybody checks it out on HBO this week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.